In the history of Japan, there are tales of great warriors and wise emperors. But one of the most enduring legends, a story whispered for over 300 years, is not about a noble or a samurai. It's about a teenage girl, a greengrocer's daughter, whose name has become a byword for a love so absolute, it burned down the world around her. Her name was Oshichi. To understand her story, you must first understand her world. The Edo of the late 17th century was a city of explosive energy. The brutal civil wars were over, and under the iron rule of the Tokugawa shogunate, Japan was experiencing a rare, prolonged peace. For the first time, it was not the samurai, but the townspeople, the merchants, the artisans, the commoners who were driving the culture. This was their time. And in the heart of this bustling city, in the Hongo district, lived Oshichi. She was the daughter of a greengrocer, born around 1666. Her life was meant to follow a simple, predictable path. Help in the family shop, marry a respectable merchant chosen by her parents, and raise a family of her own. She was an ordinary girl in an extraordinary city. But Edo had a dark secret, a constant, terrifying threat that lurked in every home and every workshop: fire. The city was a tinderbox, a sprawling labyrinth of wood and paper. A single stray spark could, and often did, turn entire districts to ash in a matter of hours. These great fires were so common they were known as the Flowers of Edo, a grimly poetic name for the city's most destructive force. In the final days of 1682, the flower of Edo bloomed with a terrible vengeance. The Great Tenna Fire, one of the most devastating in the city's history, tore through the capital. Oshichi's world was consumed by the inferno. Her home, her shop, her entire neighborhood, all of it was reduced to cinders. Homeless and destitute, Oshichi's family sought refuge at their local temple. For a teenage girl, this should have been a moment of terror and despair. But inside the sanctuary of those temple walls, amidst the chaos and the loss, she would find something that would change her life and ultimately seal her fate. She would find love. He was a temple acolyte, a boy named Kichisaburo. In the shared trauma of the fire, a powerful, all-consuming passion was ignited between them. For weeks, the temple was their world, a bubble where their secret love could blossom, away from the rigid rules of society. But this sanctuary, born from disaster, was only temporary. As the city was rebuilt, so was her family's home. The day came when they had to leave the temple. For Oshichi, returning to her old life meant being torn away from the only person she had ever truly loved. The world that had been opened up to her in the temple was slammed shut. She was trapped again in the quiet desperation of her ordinary life, her heart aching with an impossible longing. How can you go back to an ordinary world once you've tasted an extraordinary love? For Oshichi, the memory of the fire that had destroyed her home was now inseparable from the memory of the love it had given her. And in her young, desperate mind, a terrible, logical connection began to form. If a fire had brought them together once, could another fire bring them together again? The city of Edo was coming back to life, but Oshichi's world had gone silent. The new house was a cage, each day a colorless copy of the one before. The brief, vibrant world she had shared with Kichisaburo at the temple now felt like a fever dream. In the rigid society of 17th century Japan, a greengrocer's daughter had no say in her own destiny. Love was a luxury she could not afford, and free will was a dangerous fantasy. There were no secret meetings, no letters, no way to bridge the distance between her world and his. He was cloistered in a sacred space, and she was bound to her family and her station. The separation was absolute. For a modern mind, this might seem like a teenage heartbreak, a painful but temporary sorrow. But for Oshichi, it was a life sentence. The fire had given her everything, and the peace that followed had taken it all away. Her longing festered into an obsession. Every waking moment was consumed by a single burning thought: how to get back to him, how to recreate the world where they could be together. And in her young, grief-stricken mind, the logic was as simple as it was terrifying. The Great Fire had been a disaster for thousands, but for her it had been a miracle. It had been the catalyst for her happiness. The cause of her pain was not the fire, it was the rebuilding, it was the return to normal life. And so, on a cold winter's night, just 1 month after the Great Fire had been extinguished, Oshichi made her decision. She would summon a miracle of her own. If the world would not give her another fire, she would create one herself. Her motive was not malice or revenge or greed. It was, in her mind, the purest motive of all: love. She believed that a small fire, just enough to render them homeless again, would be a key to unlock the temple gates and return her to Kichisaburo's arms. It was the act of a child, unable to see past the immediate desire of her own heart. She didn't see the potential for destruction, the lives she was putting at risk. She saw only his face, a beacon in the darkness, and this was the only path she could imagine that would lead her back to it. The fire she started was small, almost pathetic. It was quickly discovered and extinguished by vigilant neighbors before it could grow into a true threat. Her plan, in that respect, had failed. But in another, more terrible way, it had succeeded perfectly. She had started a fire, and in Edo, there was no greater crime. The crime of arson was treated with extreme prejudice by the authorities. It was an act of terror that threatened the entire city. Oshichi was arrested immediately. As she was led away, the naive dream of being reunited with her lover dissolved into the cold, harsh reality of the law. She had set a spark in the night, hoping to rekindle a romance. Instead, she had ignited her own funeral pyre. Oshichi was now a prisoner, facing the brutal justice of the Tokugawa shogunate. Her crime was undeniable. But in the cold, dark halls of the magistrate's office, a strange and unexpected twist would occur. A single question would be posed to her, a question that offered a sliver of hope, a chance for mercy. Her life would come to depend not on evidence or witnesses or a confession, but on a simple number. The wheels of Tokugawa justice were swift and merciless, especially for a crime like arson. Oshichi was brought before the city magistrate, a man named Kainosho Masachika. He was an experienced administrator, a man who had seen the very worst of human nature. The case before him should have been simple. The girl had confessed, the evidence was clear, the law was absolute. In 17th century Edo, the punishment for arson was designed to be a terrifying deterrent. It was a symmetrical justice, a punishment that mirrored the crime. If you played with fire, you would die by fire. The sentence was execution by burning at the stake. There was no room for negotiation, no possibility of a lesser sentence. For Oshichi, the future seemed to hold nothing but the stake and the flame. But as the magistrate looked at the young girl trembling before him, he saw something that gave him pause. He saw not a hardened criminal, but a child whose foolish, desperate act of passion had led her to this terrible place. He felt a pang of pity, and he decided to offer her a way out. He leaned forward. The entire room was silent. He knew the law had one crucial exception. The death penalty could not be applied to minors. He looked at her, his voice deliberately calm and leading, and asked a simple question. "You are 15 years of age, are you not?" It was not a question, it was an invitation, a lifeline. He was giving her the answer. All she had to do was agree, say yes, and she would be treated as a child. She would be spared the flames. She would live. It was a test, not of her guilt, but of her willingness to grasp the chance he was offering. But Oshichi was a greengrocer's daughter, raised to be honest. Perhaps she was too naive to understand the game being played. Perhaps in her terror, she simply clung to the one thing she had left, the truth. She looked the magistrate in the eye. Her reply was clear and unwavering. "No, I am 16. With those 5 words, she sealed her fate. The magistrate's hands were tied. The law was the law. He had offered her a lie that would have saved her life, but she had answered with a truth that condemned her to death. There was nothing more he could do. The sentence was passed. Yaoya Oshichi, the greengrocer's daughter, was to be burned at the stake. The story of Oshichi should have ended there, a sad footnote in the crime records of old Edo. A foolish girl, a tragic death. But what happened after her execution is what transformed her from a teenage arsonist into an immortal legend. Her physical life was over, but her story was about to begin a new, extraordinary life of its own, one that would burn far brighter and last far longer than the fire she had set. On a spring day in 1683 at the Suzugamori execution grounds, the life of the girl named Oshichi came to a brutal end. She was just 16 years old. In the eyes of the law, she was a cautionary tale, a stark warning against the dangers of passion and defiance. Her story should have been buried with her ashes, a grim reminder of a crime and its terrible punishment. But in the crowded streets and tea houses of Edo, something remarkable happened. Her story refused to die. It spread like wildfire, passed from person to person, not as a crime report, but as a tragedy. This wasn't a story about arson, it was a story about love. A story about a girl who loved so fiercely she was willing to burn for it. The people of Edo, living in a society that demanded conformity and emotional restraint, were captivated by this tale of untamed, fatal passion. The great novelist of the era, Ihara Saikaku, was the first to immortalize her. In his best-selling book, 5 Women Who Loved Love, he transformed Oshichi from a foolish girl into a tragic heroine of romance. This was the spark that lit the fuse of her legend. Soon, her story was adapted for the puppet theatre and the kabuki stage, the 2 most popular forms of entertainment in Japan. With each retelling, the line between fact and fiction blurred. The historical Oshichi, the girl who likely acted out of a simple, desperate longing, was not dramatic enough for the stage. So the story was improved. The lover, whose very existence is uncertain in historical records, was given a name, Kichisaburo, and a dramatic backstory. In some versions, Oshichi doesn't set the fire to get back to the temple, but to warn her lover of a danger. In one famous play, she needs to ring a fire alarm drum on a watchtower to save him, but the gates are locked. To force the gates open, she starts a fire, sacrificing herself to save the man she loves. The foolish arsonist was reborn as a selfless martyr. This is the version of Oshichi that has endured, not the real girl, but the fictional heroine. She became an archetype, a symbol of pure, self-destructive love. Her story resonated so deeply because it spoke to a truth that her audience understood: the conflict between personal desire, ninjo, and social obligation, giri. Oshichi chose her heart over her duty, and while society condemned her for it, in their stories they secretly celebrated her. For over 300 years, the ghost of the greengrocer's daughter has haunted the Japanese imagination. She is a figure of tragedy, a cautionary tale, and a romantic icon. She reminds us that a story's power often has little to do with the facts. The truth of Oshichi's life is a sad tale of a troubled teenager who made a fatal mistake. But the legend of Oshichi is a timeless epic about the terrifying, beautiful, and all-consuming power of love. In the end, Yaoya Oshichi did get her wish. She created a fire that would make her immortal, a fire that has never gone out.